My name's Rob. I'm the content marketing manager for ROAST. I'm kind of going to be talking about digital PR campaigns, why we do them, and kind of what we should strive to achieve, basically. And I'm going to give you an example at the end of how ROAST have achieved it. So, like Paige mentioned at the top of the webinar, there's a bit of fatigue at the moment with sitting through webinars, but I've sat through a lot for digital PR and for content campaigns as well. And I felt there's kind of a lot of repetition and kind of a lot of obvious advice, kind of like come up with unique ideas and stuff that's like outside the box, which is kind of a bit obvious when it comes to digital PR, but I don't think anyone really addresses kind of the issues in digital PR at the moment. And that is basically that they've kind of campaigns when it comes to PR have become a bit repetitive, a bit stale, and ultimately forgettable. And I'm not talking about kind of reactive campaigns or product PR led stuff. You kind of have to use what you have to get quick links in that situation. But I think ultimately this has led to an opportunity for brands to kind of get ahead of the competition. So kind of why digital PR in the first place? So we do it ultimately to build links first and foremost. We all know that, but also to build brand awareness and also to kind of create useful content for customers or potential customers. But at the moment, digital PR is so focused on links that these campaigns are basically becoming one-dimensional, and they kind of forget about the added benefits of brand awareness and creating something useful that's going to be useful to build trust in the brand, basically. PRs and content managers kind of assume that because it gets a link, then that automatically means it's going to achieve brand awareness, or that people must automatically find it helpful, which isn't always the case. We always need to keep brand awareness and helpful content in mind when we're creating these campaigns. So I wanted to talk about useful content first. Creating useful content from a digital PR perspective is massively overlooked. PRs will kind of look for a hook despite the fact the story or data is basically pointless or useless. There's been a trend over the last few years to use or manipulate data to tell a story or make it interesting. Somewhere down the line, we decided that a good story was finding out what the most Instagrammed bins were in the UK, or the most popular baby names for murderers. Like, not every story is worth telling. There's a big difference between an interest and a need, and people can be interested, but will forget about your content in seconds. A need will have people coming back to the content over again, and it will build trust. So, like I kind of put at the bottom, if you find yourself trying to work out what a sports star is making in a minute, or how much a house costs in a video game, please really think about if that data is useful for your customers. So when it comes to useful content, like, we have to create something that's basically valuable. Even if it's just a listicle blog post or something that's just really simple, as long as you're like imparting wisdom or advice, then you're going to jump ahead of all your competitors, basically. A good way to do this is using expert advice. If you're someone qualified to deliver the information that you're trying to get ahead, then you're going to jump ahead. On Twitter, I see countless journalists asking for expert input or expert advice. So we know there's like a real need for that out there when it comes to journalists. And then finally, can your content help to solve a problem? All the best content campaigns have helped solve a problem in one form or another. If there's a real need for it, and it's a real problem, then you can go some way to sort of achieving that. Nobody's sort of lying awake at night wondering what the most environmentally friendly Avenger is. So don't do it. Relevance. So this is also another kind of a big problem in digital PR at the moment. There are far too many campaigns out there that have literally nothing to do with the brand that's put them out. It's really, really jarring. you have to have the authority to talk about the story or create a story around something that you're known for. Your aim is to create brand awareness. If you're talking about a subject that you have nothing to do with, people won't remember your brand. PRs kind of mistake relevant with relatable. Relatable isn't enough anymore. Just because you're using Spotify data in your campaign doesn't make it relatable or relevant. Everyone listens to music. You're not pinpointing kind of what you're selling or people you're selling to. Originality. Now this is kind of the big one. There's that kind of that saying that there's nothing new under the sun, and that's kind of true for the PR landscape. Content marketing managers and PRs have been a bit fast and loose with the words innovative and interesting and outside the box over the last few months in different webinars. There's too much replication out there, but this is kind of part to do with the fact that we're all chasing the same data. There's a lot of free data sets out there for different verticals, whether it's automotive, alcohol, you name it. And everyone knows where to find them, and everyone knows the specific dates they're coming out. So that means most brands are putting out the same campaigns. I see too many PRs on Twitter ruining the fact that another brand or another agency have beaten to the punch on a campaign. Like they couldn't believe that somebody else came up with the idea, despite the fact we all know where that data set comes from. We know when it comes out. The only way around this is putting brand data in the story, or trying to put your own spin on the story. People brands and agencies kind of really rely on this free data, but if you can use your own data, your own internal data, then you've got your own story. You're shaping the story yourself, and you're creating something that useful that they know where the knowledge has come from, basically. I'm going to give a bit of an example of where this is kind of rife. So every year, the DVLA puts out test-centered data for across the country. It's on like .gov.org or something like that. And every car brand or any brand that has anything to do with cars kind of jump on this. And it's kind of a race to see who can get it out first. And that campaign is usually the top 10 places in the UK to pass your test, or the worst places in the UK to pass your test. It's the same thing every year, and there's about 5 different brands that put it out. And they're all kind of chasing this headline on sites like the BBC. It is a great way of building links. It is. If a city or a town finds itself in the top 10 or the bottom 10, the chances are they're going to cover it. I mean, there's always going to be a slow news day in Stoke-on-Trent where there isn't a dispute about the local water fountain. They're gonna cover the story, and you're going to get a link. But the fact it's been done so much, the BBC have got wise to this campaign now. This screenshot that I've got here actually is from an article from last year, but the BBC put it out themselves. There's no brand behind it. It's purely just BBC doing their own research, and that's because they know where the data is now. They must have been pitched the story so much, this journalist must have been pitched it so much, that they know where the data is, they know what data comes out, that they'll just do it themselves. And we could get to the point where journalists just become wise to it now, and they put these stories out because they know where the data is, it's free to get, it's easy to access, and they'll just start doing it themselves. Also, it means the competition on this kind of campaign is so high. About 4 or 5 different brands will put this story out. And it gets to the point where if you see that headline on 4 or 5 different publications, you're not going to know which brand is behind it. It's just going to get lost in the noise. And ultimately, it's kind of pointless. So I kind of want to talk about a brand that kind of did this well. It kind of thought about it differently and made the data ultimately useful. So this is a brand called Marmalade. They're a student car insurance provider. So instead of looking at the past year's worth of past data across the UK, they looked at the last 12 years worth of pass data in the UK. They use this to create a tool that could basically tell you the odds of you passing your test in any given test center in any given month, depending on your age. What they've done there, they've used data to create something that's going to get people to keep coming back. It's a useful tool. Just telling people that, I don't know, Wigan is in the top, one of the top 10 places to pass your test in the UK. If you don't live in Wigan, it's just kind of useless. But this kind of gives you an idea of something that can turn ultimately useless data into something useful. So I'm going to give a quick summary. I've kind of rattled through that deck pretty quickly, but a bit of a summary. Even if your KPIs are just links, please look beyond it. You shouldn't just stop. You need to think about brand awareness, and you need to think if the content is useful or not. Great useful content. Think about the story and data that you're using. Make the story relevant. If you can tie your brand back to the story, or if there's no emotional tie back to story and it's not useful, then nobody's coming back to that campaign and they won't remember it seconds later. There's just basically too much repetition. There's nothing wrong in taking inspiration from a campaign you've seen, but if you can't go outside the box, make the campaign better, use your own data, or think about how you can make it actually useful and get people to keep coming back to the content. And then finally, ask yourself if people are going to remember the content. There's too many campaigns you'll see that you'll click on, you'll kind of shrug your shoulders, and then you'll move on to something else and you won't remember it. You kind of want people to be sharing it. So I kind of look at it, is it going to elicit a shrug or a share? You're going to share it with your mates, you're going to bookmark the page. And then finally, I want to move on to a campaign that we put out last year. So this is for a skincare brand called Miro. They were a startup, so they came to us for a global launch campaign, basically. They wanted to position themselves as quite high-end, which for an unknown brand is pretty competitive. They're in a very crowded market against some very established brands like Elemis. Their USP kind of ticked every box from an environmental conscious standpoint. They were vegan, they were animal cruelty free, and they contained no plastic, which made them 100% recyclable. So when we were kind of thinking of the right campaign for this, we kind of ignored the route of free data or survey data and stuff like that. Instead, we kind of turned to investigative research. We kind of immersed ourselves in the brands, in their competitors, in the industry. And this is kind of how we found a gap. So we found out a lot of their competitors were claiming the same benefits as Miro, but they weren't, in terms of being plastic free and recyclable, but they weren't being 100% truthful about what they were doing. That's how we found out about the term greenwashing. So greenwashing is essentially, if anyone doesn't know, where your brand is claiming to be more environmentally friendly than they actually are. So they're kind of using smoke and mirrors about language they use, about the data they put out to the public, where they kind of look like they're trying to save the planet, but really they're not. And a lot of their competitors were claiming that they were doing everything in their power and they were doing all these amazing things to kind of reduce their plastic use, but they weren't being 100% truthful about it. We found out that millions of people were buying into these brands because they believed they were helping to save the environment, and they were basically being lied to with smoke and mirrors. So we thought there was something in this. We thought that a lot of people trusted these brands and they're not being given all the information. So we decided to create basically an information hub. So environmentally friendly conscious customers could basically spot these greenwashing brands from a mile off. We gave them kind of a cheat sheet on language to look out for, or if there's any practices that their current favorite skincare brands do, kind of things that they can look out for. Or are they claiming that their packaging is recyclable? Are they are they saying you can refill this if you come back to the shop, which is basically putting the onus back on the customer to recycle their own packaging. We also created an information page that told you how to recycle any beauty packaging, because a lot of people, turns out, didn't know how to dispose of their like tubs of cream and stuff like that. And then we also created a petition off the back of this to make their competitors essentially more responsible and be more open about what goes into their packaging, basically. And this was kind of, this became like really relatable and relevant for customers, because people cared about what their spending habits were, and they cared about what their money was doing to the environment. So we basically this was like a truly original idea. It didn't get hundreds of links, but the links it did do kind of kicked the door open for them in the beauty industry. They're still around today, they're still thriving. They a few months later, they appeared in Vogue, they appeared in Refinery 29, they appeared in all the right places that they needed to be, because this campaign got cut through. It was original, it's got helpful information that people can keep coming back to, and people can bookmark and keep like, it just basically gives them helpful information. And then to top it off, we helped to try and solve the problem by kind of creating a petition which we're trying to change the issue that we found. So if you keep all these things in mind, you can create something that kind of goes beyond just your typical X% of the UK think this, or think that, or think this. So it's just stuff to keep in mind when you're sort of formulating these ideas. That is basically it for me. Thank you.